When my life fell apart, it was that day I decided not to give up. I never imagined my life could one day be so turned upside down in an instant. I lived with my grandmother, Ruth, a simple, quiet woman who took care of the house and gave me the space I needed to study. My routine was basically studying, helping with the housework, and trying to keep everything as normal as possible, despite the difficulties. But then, suddenly, my cousin Jessica showed up at our door with 3 small children. Nowhere to go, full of tears and stories of suffering. It was the beginning of a storm I didn't know if I could weather. Jessica wasn't just a cousin. She was a mirror of what could happen if we didn't have support. She arrived fragile, lost, like someone who had already lost everything and just wanted a safe place. I saw my plans for tranquility go up in smoke the moment she walked into the room, carrying the children, unsure of where to go. My grandmother, who had always been so calm, looked confused, afraid she wouldn't cope, but didn't have the courage to say no. My heart sank, knowing our lives would never be the same again. The first few days were the worst. The house was full, the children's noise was constant, and sleep was almost non-existent. I felt suffocated because, despite knowing we should help, my mind was focused solely on my routine, my studies, and my grandmother, who was already old and tired. It felt like we were drowning together, unsure of who was, pulling whom to the surface. I saw my grandmother exhausted, Jessica trying to pull herself together, and I felt guilty for not being more patient. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat in the kitchen with my head in my hands, feeling the weight of everything bearing down on me. I wanted to scream, cry, run away, but I had nowhere to go. Jessica stood beside me, silent, and I realized she too was at her breaking point. That's when something inside me shifted. For the first time, I looked at her and understood that, despite everything, we needed to come together, not only to survive, but to give those children a better future. Aunt Veronica's help was crucial at this time. She arrived at our house, bringing food, words of comfort, and, most importantly, a look that seemed to understand the chaos we were experiencing. She didn't judge, she didn't point out mistakes. She simply offered a shoulder to cry on and some ideas for reorganizing the house so that everyone had their own space, so that living together didn't become a daily struggle. It was a breath of hope that gave us the strength to try again, to not give up. The transformation began when we realized we couldn't keep things the same. I had to give up some things, especially my strict study routine, to help Jessica find a job and take care of the children. My grandmother, despite her exhaustion, began to accept that she needed to share the responsibilities and not try to do everything alone. Communication was difficult because there was a lot of accumulated frustration, but it was also what kept us together. The turning point was when Jessica landed her first job after months without income. Seeing her happiness was strange for me because I knew the road ahead would still be difficult, but at the same time, I felt enormous relief. I realized this was a victory for the whole family. The house was still far from perfect, but the feeling that we were moving forward gave me a little more courage to face whatever came my way. I remember that morning, the children were playing in the yard, laughing for the first time in weeks without that sad weight in their eyes. I watched and thought about how unfair life could be, but also how strong we could be. I, who had felt so alone and powerless, realized that my strength lay there, in unity, in support, in that mess of a life we built day after day. It was a hard lesson, but a real one. The biggest challenge, in fact, was learning to deal with my own frustration. I had dreams, plans, a life I wanted to build, and everything seemed to be falling apart. I felt guilty for being angry at the situation, for wanting distance. But this anger was a sign that I was alive, that I didn't want to get lost in the chaos. It was a process of understanding that the pain I felt didn't define me, that I could use it to grow, to be better. Living together also brought moments of intense conflict. Sometimes tension exploded, and we argued over small things that carried enormous weight. The pressure of sharing a space that was once ours alone, the fear of losing what we had, the emotional and physical exhaustion. I cried often in secret, feeling like I couldn't take it anymore, but I also held it together because I knew others needed me. It was a learning experience about boundaries and patience. I'll never forget the night my grandmother called me in to talk. She was exhausted, but her eyes were filled with a mixture of concern and hope. She told me she knew I was growing up too fast, that she felt the weight of responsibility, but that she was proud of me. That conversation gave me a strength I didn't know I had. It was as if, in that moment, I could take a deep breath and keep going, even though I was tired. It was difficult to find the balance between helping Jessica and not letting it destroy my life. I felt torn, guilty for not being perfect for everyone. But little by little, I understood that this is what being human is: making mistakes, trying, falling, and getting back up. I learned that asking for help isn't a weakness, and the solidarity Aunt Veronica brought was a living example of this. We can only overcome when we accept that we can't do everything alone. The day Jessica received the job news was also the day I allowed myself to cry with relief. I cried for the sleepless nights, the doubts, the moments I thought I couldn't handle. But I also cried because I saw that we could be a real family, even if it was different from what I had imagined. Overcoming this wasn't a single step, but a series of small advances that made me feel alive again. I remember a morning that seemed normal, but that changed everything. The children started running around the house happily, and Jessica looked at me and said, "Thank you for not giving up on us." In that moment, the barrier I had built between my suffering and theirs fell away. I understood that love and compassion aren't easy, but they are possible, and that I wasn't alone, that we were all on this journey together. The house, which once seemed too cramped, gradually became a home, with effort, with difficult conversations, with moments of exhaustion, but also of joy. I could see the transformation of the children, the change in my grandmother's outlook, Jessica's daily struggle to start over. It was a long process, but one that taught me that life is made of new beginnings, even when it seems like everything is over. The vulnerability we felt was enormous, but it was also what brought us closer. I learned that admitting I'm tired, that I need help, isn't a sign of weakness, but of courage. I saw Jessica bounce back despite her falls, and that gave me the strength to keep going, to believe we could overcome this difficult time. Resilience became our mantra, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. There were many times when I thought about giving up, about running away, about hiding from the world, but there was always someone who held me, who showed me that it was possible to carry on. Aunt Veronica was that person for me and my family. She taught us that true help isn't just a gesture, but a commitment to the other person, and that we can choose love, even when all seems lost. The hardest change for me was accepting that I couldn't control everything. I wanted everything to be perfect, for the house to be quiet again, for my grandmother to not suffer, for Jessica to have all the answers. But life doesn't work that way. I had to learn to deal with the unexpected, to be flexible, to have patience with myself and others. This was liberating, even if it was painful at first. I remember one afternoon, sitting in the backyard, watching the children play with such joy that I felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for what they had already been through, hope for the future we could build. I realized that, despite everything, there was still light in that chaos, and that it was my responsibility to help keep that light burning. It was a moment of clarity that has stayed with me forever. Overcoming for me wasn't just about survival, but about transformation. It was understanding that the pain we feel can be a driving force, not a prison. That family, even with all its problems, can be a place of healing if we leave room for love and dialogue. I still struggle with my fears and exhaustion, but today I know I can move forward, with greater strength and more hope. Living together brought challenges I never imagined I'd face. I had to deal with my insecurities, the judgments I received from others, and the constant fear of losing everything. But the strength I found within myself was greater than any difficulty. I learned to put myself first sometimes, without guilt, because only then could I help those I loved. It was a hard but necessary learning experience. When I looked at my grandmother and saw her exhaustion, I understood that caring for someone also means knowing when to ask for help. We tried to carry everything alone for so long that we ended up getting sick. It was a shock to realize this, but also a step toward seeking support, to avoid losing ourselves. A family is made up of many pieces, and all of them need to be cared for the whole to function. Jessica and I had our moments of conflict, of course. I was full of expectations and she was full of fears. Often, our conversations ended in tears or uncomfortable silences, but these moments served to help us understand each other better, to accept each other's limitations. We had to learn to live with our differences and pain to build something real and lasting. Aunt Veronica's support was like a beacon. She not only helped with practical matters, but also showed us that hope exists, even in the darkest days. She was there, steadfast, when no one else was, and that made all the difference. It was thanks to her that we were able to organize the house, divide the tasks, and, most importantly, respect each other's boundaries. Her presence was a gift that changed our lives. In the midst of everything, I rediscovered my strength. The strength to get up even when my body tells me to give up. The strength to forgive and be forgiven. The strength to believe that we can start over as many times as necessary. This strength gave me hope, kept me going, even when it seemed impossible. I am stronger today than I ever imagined I would be. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was one step at a time, a difficult day followed by a better day. We learned to deal with the ups and downs, to celebrate the small victories, and not let ourselves be discouraged by the setbacks. Life with Jessica and the children brought a lot of exhaustion, but also a lot of light, and I learned to appreciate that, even in the most difficult moments. At first, I felt ashamed of what we were going through. I was afraid of what others would think, afraid of being judged. But over time, I realized that this shame only distanced me from the people who could help. I learned that talking about our pain is the first step to overcoming it, and that vulnerability isn't weakness, but courage. Today, I share my story so others know they're not alone. My relationship with my grandmother changed a lot. We learned to support each other more, share responsibilities, and, most importantly, care for each other's emotional health. She began to see me as a partner, not just as a granddaughter who needed to be cared for. This strengthened our bond and gave me a sense of belonging I hadn't realized was missing. I could feel, day after day, that Jessica was finding her way again. Seeing her support her children through work and start planning for the future, even though she was still afraid, was a huge victory. I felt part of it, as if our struggle had a greater purpose. This motivated me to stay strong, to not let discouragement overwhelm me. The house became noisier, more crowded, but also more lively. I began to accept that the tranquility I sought wasn't the absence of problems, but the presence of love and support. I learned to appreciate the simple moments, the children's laughter, my grandmother's hug, Jessica's tired smile. This made all the difference in my outlook on life. I often wondered if I was doing the right thing, if I shouldn't put my own dreams ahead of myself. But I understood that helping my family doesn't mean giving up everything, but rather finding balance. I started to organize myself better, define my limits, and seek support when I needed it. This gave me more confidence to face the future. Fear of the unknown still haunts me at times, but it no longer paralyzes me. I've learned that fear is part of life, but courage lies in continuing despite it. Today, I feel more prepared to face challenges because I know I'm not alone and that I have a support network. This certainty gives me the strength to move forward, one step at a time. Living with Jessica and the children taught me empathy in a way I'd never learned before. I understood what it's like to go through hardships with nowhere to turn, what it's like to feel invisible and helpless. It made me more human, more patient, and stronger. I carry these lessons with me and know they will help me for the rest of my life. Our routine became chaotic at times, with tasks piling up, children crying, arguments, and fatigue. But we learned to laugh at these situations and not take everything so seriously. This helped ease the tension and create a more relaxed atmosphere. I realized that happiness isn't the absence of problems, but how we deal with them. What surprised me most was our ability to adapt. I never imagined I could be so flexible, so resilient. The initial pain was enormous, but we transformed it into strength, a desire to change, and hope. This transformation made me feel alive again, with the desire to build a better future. Today, looking back, I see how much I've grown, not just as a student or granddaughter, but as a person. I learned to manage my emotions, accept my limitations, and value what truly matters. The overcoming I experienced wasn't magic. It was sweat, tears, falling, and getting up again. And I'm proud of every step along the way. There are still difficult days, of course. Days when fatigue seems greater than strength, when doubt and fear appear without warning. But today I know that these days don't define me. They are part of my story, which is full of struggle, but also of love and hope. I continue to learn, transform, and move forward. Living with Jessica, the children, and my grandmother showed me what family is. A place where we can be imperfect, suffer, make mistakes, but also love and be loved. I learned that we can create strong bonds even in the most difficult situations. and that these bonds are our greatest strength. I will carry this lesson with me forever. If I could say one thing to anyone going through something similar, it would be, don't give up. The pain can be overwhelming, but we have incredible strength within us. Seek support, talk about what you're feeling, don't isolate yourself. Overcoming grief begins when we accept help and choose to keep going, even when it's difficult. I'm still in the middle of this journey. I still have my bad days, my doubts, my fears. But today I know I can face anything, because I've faced so much. My family's story isn't perfect, but it's true and full of love. And it's this truth that gives me hope for the future.